Welcome, everybody. It is so great to have you here at the Writers Bridge today. Welcome to members of our community, both new and old. It is great to see people who I know and love, and it is also great to see people who are brand new to the Writers Bridge. So glad to have you. Today, we are going to talk about webinars, how to pitch a webinar you want to teach, effective teaching techniques as a participant, how to get the most out of webinars you attend. I will definitely be telling you about my key webinar fails. We do have our do-overs episode coming up November 29th. Allison Lane from Allison Lane Literary will be co-hosting, and this is where we look at your social posts, pitches, and queries that didn't get the response you want. So if you have launched an Instagram post or reel or a TikTok that got no comments, a tweet or a Facebook post that nobody engaged with, a blog or newsletter that nobody responded to, a pitch or a query that is hanging in the wind and nobody is responding, you can email us with the document or the link, and we will be looking at them and saying, hey, here is how we would make over this post, this pitch, this first page of your book in a way that will make it more engaging, because whatever is causing people to not engage in that post, in that pitch, in that query is probably something that you can fix in all of your writing. You will get the follow-up email from us, and that will be the email that you can hit respond to, and it'll be pretty specific about what to send us. Our question of the week. Oh, hey, and Allison's here too. Hi, Allison. Nice to have you. Our question of the week, Jennifer asks, I have heard about launch teams. What are they? What do you do? And how can you get one? Well, a launch team is basically your friends, your family, and your writer colleagues, not necessarily people who are your best friends, but people you know who have agreed to help promote your book. They can call their local library and request the book. They can take postcards over to the local indie bookstore or request the book there. They can post on their socials about your book. They can send emails to their friend. They can talk about the book in their church newsletter or their next door group. One of the very best things a launch team can do for you is to post reviews the first day the book is out and remind your friends, this does not mean they have to carefully read the whole book cover to cover and write something thoughtful and considered. It is enough for them to flip through your book, find a couple of things they like, write 4 or 5 good sentences on Amazon and copy paste them to Goodreads. They will read the rest of the book later. It is more useful if you are on somebody else's launch team to make it happen on time rather than to wait around until you've got the absolutely perfect thing to say about their book. The best way to use your launch team in our question of the week here is to send them an email a couple of months in advance with 3 options for them to do. More than 3 and people get confused. Make one of them super easy, like call the library and request my book, or put the attached graphic on your socials. Make one of them a little bit more challenging, like review the book on Amazon with a photo and copy paste the review to Goodreads. And for your bestest friends or the people who owe you the most favors, give them something a little more challenging, like take an ARC, an advanced reader copy, and some postcards to the local indie bookstore and tell them about the book. So, how do you get people on your launch team? Well, you start doing favors for other authors as far in advance as you can before your book is even finished. Now is the time to review all your friends' books on Amazon. And it's okay if you got that book at the library, because you can take a picture of it on your e-reader and Amazon will go, oh yeah, this is a legit review. We will publish it, even though we do not have a record of them purchasing the book here. It is a great time to shout out other people's books on social media, repost when they announce their launch. Even just like saying congratulations makes people think of you positively. And then when your book is ready for launch team, ask people for specific tasks that it would really help you if they did. So Jennifer, I hope that answers your question of the week about what is a launch team and how do you get one. Let me introduce our guest this week, Charla Yates. And Charla is the Director of Education for Creative Nonfiction. And she is also Creative Nonfiction Foundation, which is a nonprofit organization. I know many of you have taken webinars there or read the magazine, that inspires and supports writers of true stories by providing publishing venues and educational opportunities for a diverse range of creative nonfiction writing and writers. They have courses, they have webinars, they have talks, they have all kinds of fantastic stuff. Charlotte, welcome. And will you start out by telling us a little bit about what the heck do you do for creative nonfiction? We've heard the lofty mission statement. What does that boil down to?
Hello, everybody. Nice to be here, to be invited. I'm in charge of managing all the major educational outreach and programming. That does include online classes, online workshops that are now live on Zoom, self-guided courses online, and we have nearly every week we have a webinar on Wednesday at 2 p.m. So I help facilitate that.
Fantastic. And what makes webinars good? Like, when do you hear participants saying, oh, I love this, this helped so much? What kind of things makes a webinar a big hit?
That's a great question. And I'm going to frame this as an educational platform. So webinars can be used in a myriad of ways. And but specifically for creative nonfiction, we use it as instruction, as a learning opportunity. So generally what makes a webinar good is that it delivers on what it says it's going to deliver on the marketing copy. So there's usually like a list of things that you're going to learn or walk away with understanding, and you have to like cover those in the webinar. And then I would say a good webinar does that and then over delivers. It has added value, and that could be supplemental materials, a really engaging Q&A, an opportunity to submit work before the webinar to be used as an example during the webinar. There's different ways to add value. Takeaways that can be applied to the attendees' work immediately or to what their goals are immediately, and feeling inspired and energized in the webinar. So I would say that's generally what makes a good webinar. Of course, there's some best practices as well. But yeah.
Let us dive into best practices in just a second. I just want to comment on the thing about the marketing copy. So when I write marketing copy for webinars, there's two things that I do that are really important and that I think help me do a decent job. One is I look at what is the writer's problem and how is what I'm going to deliver be their solution. And so whether this is an educational webinar or a sign up for my course or program webinar or a get to know me better and join my mailing list webinar, identify their problem and tell them how you're going to fix their problem. So like, for example, I might do a webinar where I say, struggling in your second draft, not sure if this messy pile of material has a point anymore. Come to my workshop on second drafts where we will discuss how structure can carry you through your manuscript. So I'm really specifically addressing, this is the problem you have that I am going to fix. Mm-hmm. The other thing I do is once I've written that marketing copy, I copy paste it into a document that becomes my outline for my lesson plan. And I bold all of the stuff that is on the marketing document so that as I go through, I know I'm checking it off and I am actually addressing everything I promised I would. Charlotte, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, I think that's a great, we actually asked that in our webinar proposal pitch, like, what is the problem or fear that your presentation is going to solve? But I would also add that sometimes you have to explain to people why it's a problem or fear that needs to be solved. So sometimes it's known, like, okay, I have a second draft, now what? But sometimes you have to let them know, like, your sentences are bogged down, or why is it that no one's accepting my book pitch? You have to let them know that there's a problem that you're going to solve as well sometimes.
Where do you see webinars fail? Where do you see it's just not working, or they get bad reviews after on the casual survey? Like, we're not expecting you to name any names or anything, but what are the bad practices that you've seen happen that people should fix or avoid falling into those sandpits?
Yeah. So I would say webinars that aren't practiced, there's a lot to like practicing the presentation. I'm not just reading a script that your eyes are away from the camera the whole time. People can really sense that you're disengaged that way. I would say not being mindful of the time, going under is a cardinal sin in webinars. If you promise an hour, you better be an hour, maybe a little bit more, but definitely at least an hour. And then I would say, again, not delivering on what you said you're going to deliver, or doing it at a level that you said that you're going to be advanced interviewing, for example, skills, and you did it at a fundamental level. That disappoints people. Any time that a webinar feels more, it doesn't give many examples. Inspirational quotes are great, but examples, people like adult learners like to see things in action, but they also like to know how it can be immediately applied to their own work. So that's useful. And if someone spends too much time, even if it's a free webinar, if it seems obviously self-promotional, it doesn't go well. If you talk too much about your own work without giving a caveat, like, I'm only using this for example because of this, it tends to turn people off. If a webinar is great to promote your work and to have people join your newsletter list, or to follow up with you and want to know more about you. It is a great tool for that, but erring on the side of generosity instead of self-promotion is the best way to go. And people see right through self-promotion. But yes,
I wholly agree. And I've been to webinars, and it's not usually writing webinars. It's usually somebody's social media oriented webinar where they're promising to teach me things A, B, and C. And it's actually like 15 minutes of A, B, and C. And the rest of it is, let me tell you about the course that you're here to purchase that I'm going to sell you. And I feel like it really is kind of like dealing heroin. You got to give away the first one free. And then people will understand that what you have to give them is of value. Not to say that anyone present here should actually be indulging in heroin of any kind, but think about it this way. Heroin is a product that people love to buy. It is not a thing you have to forcibly sell people. And I think writers are very aware of whether they are buying something or whether they are being sold something. And when they're being sold, they can feel it, and they can feel that you are not in there for them. I think
the difference between pure heroin and heroin that's cut with other drugs.
Yes. So, I mean, not to take us completely down the drug lane there, but I do want to add one more thing to that before we dive back into some practical elements, which is that I once heard the actor Russell Brand, and he was talking about his past heroin addiction. And yes, trigger warning, everybody. And he said, here is why you get addicted to drugs, because we all have inside us that tiny longing to be really seen, that tiny emptiness that is never quite filled. And when you take heroin fills that hole. All of a sudden, you don't feel unseen. You don't feel like you have a tiny little hole in you. You feel ready to go out there and take on the world, and everything is just great and fine. And a really good webinar should give your listeners not just specific things that they can do and that they can apply to their work. It should make them feel excited about diving into their work and applying these techniques to their work. You want to find what is that little hole that is empty that your teaching can fill. Charlotte, you want to add on that?
Yeah, I would say being inspiring and being energized by what you're talking about is important, even if it's something as dull as revision. You have to find the reason why it's exciting, and you need to express that to the audience. And Allison, of course, you're a great example of someone who does this, and it is a bit of a performance, and you just have to be aware of that. But if you have a teaching background, you already know that all teaching is a bit of a performance. When we're performing too, Allison Lane points out in the chat,
Watch out for terrible tech, bad lighting, too far or too close to the camera, starting late, reading slides instead of actually delivering a narrative. It is worth it to get a webcam that is a little bit better than the camera on your computer. I have a super fancy cam where I can make a little sign at it and then it'll like zoom in on me, which I think is kind of fun. Come on, don't make me a liar, camera. Don't make me a liar.
It did it a little bit. There we go.
But you know, and I love that, but it does make it look a little bit better than, you know, than what I had before on just my plain web camera. The other thing is, people can either read your slide or they can listen to you. They cannot do both at the same time. And so I find that I just want to put a couple of key things on my slides with an image that helps cement them in people's brain. And my slides are my lesson plan. I don't need a separate piece of paper unless it's a really involved webinar. The slides remind me what I was going to teach too. Charlotte, what makes great slides?
Oh, well, you definitely don't want to fill your slide full of small text. It doesn't matter how much you're reading it. It doesn't matter how large they can zoom out their screen. Nobody likes small text on a slide. I would say also being aware of copyright laws are important. You know, if you're using somebody else's work, be sure to give title, author. It's a teaching platform, or as a teaching opportunity, so you have the copyright laws are a bit different. You can borrow material to use for teaching purposes, but you just need to make sure that you're giving proper attribution. Let me see. I know that Jane Friedman has a how to make a good slide YouTube link that I can put in the chat, but what would you suggest, Allison?
No more than three points on a slide, if you can possibly avoid it. Like, yeah, I break that rule all the time, but it really helps to take your slides down to the minimum for them to remember what you said. It should be like an extra set of notes for them to have these slides rather than a transcript of your lecture, which they're very often going to get from the webinar people as well. I also find that if the photo is a little bit incongruous or the photo is a little bit funny, it helps cement the lesson in people's heads. And I actually ended up getting a subscription to a professional stock photo site called FreePik, FREEPIK. I think it's like $175 a year or something like that, which is steep if you're not teaching webinars a lot. But it has been so useful to be able to download stock photos. And they have a lot of the stuff like, I need a dude with a megaphone on a plain yellow background. I need the same dude, but now he's wearing a tutu and he's on a plain blue background. And they do a lot of stuff that's specifically meant for advertising and for slides. And there's a lot of what I think of as commercial photos rather than like moody or emotional photos like you might get on Unsplash or other sites. How important are things like supplemental materials, like slides, like they get an extra workbook? I know Jane has a practice of, if you get the questions into the Q&A box before the end of the webinar, all questions will be answered in writing in the follow-up if she doesn't get to them. How important is that kind of supplemental stuff?
I would say that it's always to be generous and then add value. You want people to leave your webinar saying, wow, that was so much more than I expected. I paid a little bit, I spent a little bit of time, and I left with a huge amount of resources. Even if those resources languish on their computer, there's a sense of satisfaction knowing it's there whenever they need it. And so supplemental materials is a great way of doing that, of adding value. And also the follow-up email with the recording, I always suggest offer the recording. If you can also use that as a moment to be like, if you want to know more about this, here's my website, here's my newsletter, it's just a great opportunity to continue to have a relationship with people who attended your webinar. And if you leave them feeling great, that's even better because they'll want to know more.
I agree. I very often have people say, oh, that was worth way more than I paid for it. And sometimes I actually have to slow down and remember not to give people so much stuff that they'll be totally overwhelmed. But that's also something where if you can't hide it, hang bells on it. Many of you have been to a webinar of mine. You know that at the very beginning of the webinar, I very often say, I'm going to deliver a fire hose of information for you. Thank you, Brian Watson, hashtag fire hose me. Our hashtag royalty is here. And I say to everybody, I highly recommend that even if you are here live, you plan to watch this webinar again, because there's going to be more than you can process.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes this leads to something very beautiful and lovely, which is that I taught a webinar called Pitch, Publish, Get Paid for Jane Friedman a few months ago. It was a lot of material. And there was a group of writers, a group of 6 or 7 writers, 9 writers who were like, this workbook is too much for me to do on my own. So they all started meeting once a week to go through the workbook together and do the activities, with each of them taking a turn leading. And I went and I'm like, oh, hey, this is great. You want me to drop in and answer any questions and stuff? And I just dropped into their meeting one day. And now they're starting to Twitter me and email me with, I just got this piece published because I pitched it based on your webinar. And that is just so freaking rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
But it can help to suggest that to people and say, hey, you know, drop your email in the chat, drop your information in the chat. You're going to get the transcript of the chat, and you can get in touch with other authors who might want to work together with you.
Amy asked how you gracefully get people to sign up for your list virtually if you teach a webinar. It's great because you can, if you're working with an organization, I know we're going to maybe talk about that, they can do that for you. They can say, they can put the link into the chat box. They can say, if you want to know more from this person, you know, go there to this link and sign up. You can also put it in the outgoing email as well. People don't mind if it's a link that they're being, you know, voluntarily signing up for versus maybe, you know, getting an email they never signed up for. So it's a great opportunity for that as well.
I've got 2 ways to get people to sign up for that have been really, really helpful. For both live and webinars, I now put a QR code on the first slide where I'm explaining, here's how this webinar is going to go. And by the way, you can scan this QR code right now if you want to go ahead and sign up for my mailing list.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I've found, and I started doing this in person where I was in control of the slides, rather than uploading slides to a conference website where people can download them, I say, sign up for my list and I will be sending out the slides, you know, tomorrow or the next day or whatever. You can unsubscribe anytime you want, but most people do end up subscribing. The other thing I started doing was saying, okay, you're going to automatically get the slides and the materials and the Q&A from the organization. And usually it takes the organization a couple of days to get it out. But if you want the slides tonight, click this link and they will come immediately after the webinar, because I have a workflow set up in Flowdesk where as soon as they sign up for that part of my newsletter, they immediately get the slides sent right to them. So they're still going to get all the bonus materials directly from the organization, but I'm also giving them a, hey, you get a free extra thing if you sign up with me as well. Is that shitty and cheating?
No, I think that's brilliant. That's smart. Whatever, you know, if you want it right away, yeah, sign up, get it right away. I would say that, yeah, I was going to agree with Allison about this, how you ask people specifically in the language. You know, you can always rephrase it to make it sound more appealing as well. That's a great idea. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, you bring that back. I'll just mention Allison Lane says in the chat too, don't specifically say sign up for my email because nobody wants more mail. Sign up for my writing tips, sign up for my great jokes, sign up for my, you know, give them something specific that feels like a gift.
I remember what I was going to say. So supplemental materials, people think, well, if they're going to get the recording, they don't need my slide deck. This is like it's a leap of imagination for lots of us, because we think, well, they can just watch it when they want. But people actually love to print slide decks and then write notes on them. So it's something to consider. And they always leave them with something in, you know, along with the recording as well. It's just an extra, and it feels like they left with something substantial. I would also say that offering the slide deck, offering the recording, and any other supplemental materials and letting them know ahead of time keeps people relaxed. They don't have to write down rigorous notes. They can just enjoy passively, maybe think more about what they want to ask you than it is for them to try to stay on top of everything that you're saying. So that's another reason for supplemental materials.
And it costs you nothing to export your slides as a PDF. If you end up with giant PDFs, like I end up doing these PowerPoint decks that have, 90 slides and a whole bunch of photos in them, and my slide deck exports as 186 megabyte PowerPoint. There's a great website called ilovepdf.com where it is absolutely free. You can upload your giant PDF and it will shrink it to a very small PDF. And suddenly my 186 megabyte PDF is like a 4 megabyte PDF. And I found that to be tremendously helpful. It's a really easy site to use.
Great.
Yeah. Charlotte, is it important for the teachers to promote the webinar themselves as well as Creative Nonfiction's giant mailing list?
I would say it is helpful. We work really hard to kind of lift that burden for the presenter, especially if you're new to webinars or you don't have a huge following. It definitely I would not discourage you from giving a webinar, because you'll reach so many people on our mailing list. And we do have a marketing director, we have an editorial team. We all work on your copy to make it sing the best that we can sing and look the best as it can look, and then we send it out. But it is always helpful because you have people in your life that may not be familiar with us. So what you can do is always link back to our marketing copy. That's kind of what I would suggest. Go to our Twitter, go to our Instagram, and share that on your socials. Or if you have an email list of people that might be interested, you can do it that way as well. I would just caution you from emailing too many people for something that they have to pay for. But if it's free, be as liberal as you want. So
I also find that very often the organization will make a graphic that I can put in my email signature, and I put it in there with the link, and it sits there and it hits all of my emails that I send out just automatically. And I just rotate signatures as new events come up. If the organization does not make a graphic, I will make my own graphic, either using the organization's colors and logo or using my colors and logo. And more specifically, I delegate this to my virtual assistant. But if you can use Canva or you can use PowerPoint, you can also make your own graphics if the organization has not provided it. How important is it to partner with an organization versus just teaching your own webinars when you feel like it?
I mean, the best part of it is that we have a machine that's already running, so that you don't have to worry about how you're going to promote it. I mean, I would like to add to that question that you asked before, that it's good to think about the ways that you reach people and figure out on your end, like, how can I add the webinar to this? Like, Allison, she has a webinar with Creative Nonfiction. She might have an article or essay she writes for Brevity, and she links it on the bottom because it's about the same topic. Just thinking of the ways that you reach people and how you can add it as a value there.
And it's really helpful to build a relationship with an organization that publishes blogs. Like, pitch your blog to Brevity, pitch your blog to Jane Friedman. We always need material. And as long as the blog is legit, here is genuine information that you are getting from this blog, no matter whether you ever buy another thing or even click this link at all, it's really nice to then have it tie into what you're about to teach, and you promote what you're going to teach at the bottom of the blog. It has to be a valuable blog on its own, which is great practice, but it's a great way to get into somebody else's email list.
Yeah. And then, like I said before, if you're working with an organization, you might want to create a relationship with that organization, or you might want to do a great job, and then they'd be ask you maybe in the future to come back, especially if they have rolling programming like CNF does. So that's a great way of getting your toe in the door. I would also say that working with an organization, if the tech goes wonky, if someone's payment doesn't go through, if there is some issue, it's on us as an organization, not on you. Really, all you have to worry about is your presentation, showing up and thinking about ways that you might want to, leverage it, monopolize it for, but other than that, it's really, we'll be taking care of the communication. We'll be taking care of scheduling. We'll be taking care of payments. So you can kind of relax.
I have found it so incredibly helpful to partner with organizations because it does two things. Number one, it does everything Charla said, where I am not having to handle the angry lady who insisted she doesn't know how to handle a PDF. And so we needed to send her a version of the PDF workbook that had notes on every page, like you can write on this page in these spaces if you print it, or just answer the questions in your own notebook. This exercise should be done in your manuscript on your computer because we got so many all caps emails and I didn't have to deal with 90% of them. The people at the organization dealt with 90% of them, which was great. But the other thing it does is it expands your audience to partner with an organization. I do not have 50,000 people on my email list, but Jane Friedman does. I don't even know how many people Creative Nonfiction has on their list, but I'd be willing to bet it's somewhere in the 5 figures as well. Charla, is there a giant Creative Nonfiction email list?
There sure is, and I don't know the number.
That's okay. It's giant.
But it's pretty successful at reaching people. Yeah.
It exposes you to a whole new audience who may not know you exist yet. And it legitimizes you to those people because those people have already said, I trust Creative Nonfiction to send me stuff in my inbox every week. Oh, look, this person has effectively been endorsed by Creative Nonfiction. So I will give them a chance. I will give them a try. Charla, if we want that beautiful benefit, how do we sign up to teach a webinar? Do we pitch you? Do you reach out to us and anoint us with your Creative Nonfiction fairy wand? How does it all work?
Yeah, so I would say with any organization that offers webinars, it's a good idea to go and check out what they offer and who their audience is, because a good webinar is very mindful of audience, just like good writing. So who is the ideal writer for what you want to present on? Is that writer in their queue, like someone that would go to, if you want to teach like world building and fantasy, obviously Creative Nonfiction is not the place to go. But world building and memoir, come on over. So what you do is just look at what they offer. Even if they don't offer webinars necessarily, but they have online programming, you might still want to reach out to them. You might be their first webinar. And I would say, think about what it is that you could teach, who it is that would benefit from it, those problems that we talked about before, what problem does it solve, and then look for their administrator and reach out to them and say, hey, I would like to pitch a webinar. What's the process? For Creative Nonfiction, our process is you would reach out to me and I would, I'll put my email in here in just a moment, and then I would send you a webinar pitch proposal, and then you would fill that out and then it would be reviewed and accepted or not accepted, but that's the process.
And that addresses part of Liza's question, which is, as far as creating the proposal for the webinar, so far, most of the organizations I have taught for, they have a template that they want me to use. Jane Friedman has a template that she directs you to and says, fill out your information in this template. Creative Nonfiction has a template that they direct you to. You fill it out in Google Forms so that it automatically goes into whatever filing system they use at minimal hassle for them. I have then used those templates as my own template when I'm pitching a webinar to an organization that does not have a template, because now I have a sense of, okay, 3 big problems they're going to have, 3 big takeaways they're going to get, a series of bullet points that address specific problems and pain points. And it's really helpful to have worked in other people's templates before, because you see what the tried and true version has been.
Yeah, and I would say our templates are actually, we ask people to think of it as part syllabus and part marketing copy. So we ask them to address the you, instead of saying things kind of like a distance third person. It's more like, think about exactly what people will gain from it. So we kind of give we give examples too of how wording should sound. So there's another benefit of working with organizations, is that if you have questions or you struggle with anything, or they've done it before, they can help you along with that.
What's the difference? Debbie asks in the chat, what's the difference between a webinar and an online workshop? Is there a difference?
I would say there's a volume difference, definitely. A webinar, usually you don't have a maximum, or you have a maximum of, like, for us, it's 500 people before we're in a different tier of webinar. And it's passive. And so unlike a workshop, you might be might go on screen and work through something, have ability to share work, where a webinar, you're more listening to a presentation. So a webinar, I like to tell people, is like if someone, you go like a keynote speaker, they're there on the podium, they're talking to you. There is more of an ability to interact than it would be in like a talk like that, but it's minimal. Where a workshop, it's more everybody's on that podium in a circle talking. That's how I kind of think of it.
I think of workshops as well as you're probably going to get some element of your own writing analyzed, and there might also be in-class exercises. Bless you, Brooke. So I think it's really helpful to think about how the webinar is much more of like a broadcast kind of thing, and the workshop often feels more personal. I just want to show you guys really quick, because a lot of people were asking about the templates. I'm just going to show you. You should all be right now looking at a Word document that is actually my template from Jane Friedman. So her template that I have put my information in, where she gave instructions about, we need a title and a subtitle that further enhances letting us know what it's all about. And then notice here, I'm identifying the problem. You've got a beautiful, wild, and free first draft. Now what? Maybe you need more words or fewer, but which ones and where? Or you found out that the story just doesn't quite resolve. So the first paragraph is, you have some problems. And the second paragraph is, here is the solution for it. You'll learn how to revise a first or early draft into a structured, powerful story with engaging characters and a strong hook. There it is. That's what you're going to get. There are some bullet points. And what I really like with the bullet points is the little extra parentheticals that are kind of clickbaity. So starting your novel or memoir with an engaging hook in the very first pages, and the promise your prologue must make. And it's a little bit cheesy, but there's a reason that people use these little like extra tips here. What the theme is. Tip, it's not the moral of the story. And it's not necessarily everybody's voice to do that kind of chipper, clickbaity kind of stuff, but I've found it very effective. We've got a list of who should take this course. And this webinar is in December. So writers who have done NaNoWriMo, which is happening right now, is one of my key audiences for it. Who should not take this course? And I usually try to be a little bit snarky about who should not take this course. Writers who plan to publish without further editing or revisions. Because I want to both deliberately send a thing like, this course is not for you if you feel like your book is finished. It's genuinely not going to be an enjoyable experience for you. But I also want the people who do want to take the webinar to feel like, well, I know that I need editing and revisions, and feel a little bit proud of themselves for signing up for the webinar. And then we specifically say, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get some worksheets. You're going to get a PDF of the slides. And Jane will also add that there's going to be a Q&A on there. Charla, are there any major differences between that and the creative nonfiction template?
I don't think so. It looks pretty similar. I have to say, I want to sign up for your webinar now. So very effective copy. Yeah. And it's, always having what you're going to gain, what you're going to walk away with. It's really important to have that be very concrete. And those tips are wonderful.
We have got a great question in the chat, which is that Dr. Danielle asks, in general, would I be able to repurpose my content, or is the content I deliver exclusive to that webinar? Charla, what's your verdict on that? It's
yours. You own it. Take it, revise it, make it better, pitch it to someone else. That is very much your own. The recording, though, however, is likely going to be the organization's recording, though you can ask them to have parameters around how much, if they choose to use it again in a different purpose, that you don't want them to do that or anything like that. But yeah. Good
And
question.
I find too that there were a couple of times where I have downloaded the webinar recording because I usually listen after to see like, where did I stutter? Where did I sound weird? Have I developed a new annoying mouth tick? Like I cured myself of about 8 years ago, but I still do this weird like clicky thing with my tongue that I'm trying to bail out of now. But I have found that it's useful to listen, but the webinar recording is not actually going to be useful for anybody else because it really has the energy of that specific workshop. And if I was going to teach it again as maybe like a download anytime from my website, I would tape a new one that reflects that I'm talking to one person rather than talking to a class as a whole, because I like to interact in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I also find too that I repurpose a lot of material. And nowadays I try very hard to use slides that share the same color palette, because then it's much easier to pull a bunch of slides out of past presentations and go, okay, I know I want to talk about this concept, this other concept. I need a couple of new slides over here. Okay, let's make it all look kind of similar.
That's great
Charlotte,
advice.
do people notice when you repeat material? The students, like, do you have students who say, oh, this was really similar to what they taught last time?
No, I don't think so. I don't think, and if they did, I'd be, I would wonder why they signed up twice. It's usually the same topic. No, I don't think that's a problem.
And I've had people who have taken the same webinar. I usually offer them every other year, but I've had people who've taken the same webinar because they wanted, sometimes I update the information, they wanted a refresher, that kind of thing. And I find that really, really helpful. So if we are attending webinars, what can we do to get the most out of our $15 or our $25 or our $250 as the consumer?
Yeah, I think the great thing about webinars is they are kind of passive for the attendee in the way that you can kind of sit back and enjoy a concert. But I would say if there's any opportunities in the beginning to read, if they add like supplemental materials to read beforehand, you might want to take advantage of that. During the webinar itself, take advantage of the Q&A if you're attending live. I mean, it's really a great way that you have that person captive of asking whatever it is that pops in your head. And if you feel embarrassed by the question, you think it might be whatever, embarrassing, you can always go anonymously. And change your name to anonymous or remove yourself and ask that question. So it is a great way to relax, listen, and ask your questions. But there really isn't much more demand than that. You don't even have to pay for parking or wear pants.
I have a great question from Liza in the chat. What about hosting or moderating panel discussions? Where do those fit in the webinar landscape?
It's a great question. And I think that's another great use of a webinar. And if you want to use webinars to reach more people or to meet these authors you admire, offering to facilitate a panel is a great way of doing that. So for creative nonfiction, we don't really have many panels. We just kind of started rolling one out a month, sometimes 2 months, but usually someone comes to us and says, hey, I have an idea. I want to talk about, for example, we have one coming up in January about writing residencies. Do you think your audience would be interested in a panel discussion about writing residencies? And I'm like, well, it's not really in the pocket for us, but it's related. It's tangentially related to what we do. So yeah, I'd like to offer it for free. I can pay the panelists a little bit. I can't pay them a whole lot, but if they're interested and they're interested in finding people to talk about it and they host it, we'll work with them to make sure that happens and we'll advertise it and so forth. So it's like, it's different than a webinar, but it's still informative and it's still useful. It's useful for us as an organization because whenever we offer free programming, our newsletter list grows. It's good for the person who wants to do the presentation or facilitate the questions because they get an opportunity to do something that's a little literary citizenship-ish, but also possibly also build their own newsletter list and also work with people that they want to work with. So it's a great opportunity to do it that way as well.
I really like that. I really like that. Now, you mentioned pay, and we are often brought up to think that it is indelicate to talk about pay or money, or to demand that it's somehow crass that we would like to be paid for our art. Charla, do you have a sense of, what is the budget for webinars for creative nonfiction? What do you typically pay people who are first timers? Is that different that you pay more experienced people?
Yeah, I mean, different people that have broader reach, that are going to lift a lot of the marketing load with us, we give them a much more generous breakdown of the profits. But we do a base pay, and if we have our gross is 10%, if 10% of our gross is greater than that base pay, then we give the greater amount. The wonderful things about webinars is that, okay, so if you do in-person programming, you have a limitation with space. 12 to 20 people might be able to attend an in-person program. So you have to charge each person more to make it worth the instructor's time. Online programming, especially webinars, we can have so many more people arrive. The amount they pay is so much less. And you can pay the instructor more. So it's just a really great model for that. The more people that attend is better for us at CNF. We want to, if the more people attend, we want it to benefit the presenter as much as it benefits us to have more people attend. So that is always good. If you want to share the marketing, it's beneficial to you that way.
And I'll say too,
question, I feel like that was.
Yeah, no, that's a great answer. And I want to add too about the pay scale. I have done webinars for groups that were smaller or had a small honorarium, like $100, $50. I have done very expensive webinars that brought in a lot more than that. What I have discovered is that I would rather work for free than for cheap, because that's where I am in my career. I would rather donate my services to the book club that only has $50 than accept their $50. You may not be at that place in your career. That may not be what works for you personally, but whatever works for you, think it through so that you are content with what you're getting. I will show up for free at people's events if they give me everybody's email who's going to be at the event, and I can add them all to my list. There needs to be a benefit for me in there beyond just, hey, I'm going to show up because I love talking and hearing the sound of my own voice. I will say that for me, the range has been anywhere from a couple $100 to organizations where I've been like a first time person for them. And they're like, oh, we pay, $175. And I'm like, that's real nice. I would like to work 50-50. How do we make that work for you? I have a mailing list of this many people, and I will be happy to promote as much as I possibly can. And sometimes that works really well. And sometimes I look like an idiot and they didn't get very many more people than they were expecting to get to begin with.
Oh.
I will say, sorry, Charlotte, go ahead, jump in.
No, I was just thinking about, that I never had that experience where the marketing load was being shared that didn't work out very well. It's always seemed to work out pretty well.
I had one where it was not what I expected. So, but
it's all about audience, right?
Yeah. I learned a lot. Yep. New audience, different people. And I had one earlier this year that really it did not tank in the sense that the people who were there were very happy to be there and had a great time and learned a lot. It was not the amount of money I wanted to make for the amount of time I was putting in on developing this brand new webinar on a brand new topic that I now know is not a marketable topic through that particular platform. But I had to teach that webinar to learn that lesson. What I mostly do, and at this point, I have been teaching webinars regularly. I'd say I teach a minimum of 2 webinars a month or other like online events a month for probably 3.5 or 4 years now. And I was teaching live before that. So I would say I'm probably closer to the upper mid-level of the pay range, and higher than me, you're getting into like social media princesses and Amy Porterfield and people like that who have, these 50,000 person lists. Most places that I do, I split 50-50 after the PayPal charges are taken off. And with the 50-50 split, I am happy if I am making somewhere in the low 4 figures. I am thrilled if I am making somewhere in the medium 5 figures. And that's for like larger webinars that cover several weeks and have, a bonus component of some kind. But a lot of it really is building your reputation as a person who over delivers, as a person where they walk out of your webinar and they say great things about you on the survey, so the organization is happy and the organization wants you back, where they say great things in the chat that you can then copy paste and use as testimonials for pitching to future organizations. And where I have that really nice warm glow of, hey, I did a good job and people learned stuff. There was a really nice question from Cheryl. How do you measure the impact of your webinars? When do you feel like the work or time was worth it? And Charlotte, I'm going to ask you for your perspective on this, but I time everything I do. I stopwatch all of my creative work, and putting together a brand new webinar takes me anywhere from 18 to 25 hours in terms of planning the lesson plan, putting the slides together, actually teaching the webinar, including the part where I take my living room apart and set it up as my studio, and then answering all the Q&A questions the day after, plus some marketing time. If it's a webinar I've taught before, it's going to take me somewhere between 8 and 12 hours because I freshen up all the slides, make sure I'm happy with the pictures. Sometimes I change the color scheme, see if there's any new research that people need to know about for what I'm talking about. And I know that it's worth it because people say, oh, that's great. I loved it. I had a really nice time. Charlotte, how do you measure it? How do you measure when it was really worth it?
Yeah, on the organization side, I can speak to that. And it's, we rely heavily on the student feedback because our webinars, people are not on camera. But even now that we're on camera, it's hard to know how everyone's feeling about what's going on. You don't have that feedback happening, but the surveys, you have the feedback. So we definitely rely heavily on that. There's always going to be outliers in the survey, someone who thinks it's, the best thing that they've ever attended, and someone who thinks that was an entirely waste of my time. You ignore those, you look at the middle. How's the middle feeling? And then, of course, how many people enrolled. So that's also telling you whether or not this was a topic that is of interest to people. That's not whether or not it was successful. That's more popularity, interest level. But the surveys is where you look at, okay, was that successful? And then I'm attending the webinars too, so I have a sense, oh, this is going well, this is interesting, or I'm learning something. Then, some webinars where I'm like, I hope people are still awake.
So who thinks they might teach a webinar at some point? Maybe, kind of. Tanya's
Morgan is.
Morgan is, yeah.
I'm doing a workshop. It's not really a webinar. I'm doing a 1 to 2 hour presentation to students on feature writing. So this has been really helpful. It gave me a lot of ideas that I didn't have. And I also didn't realize how similar what I'm going to be doing is to this. So thank you very much.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. So welcome back, everybody. I am so glad to have you all back in the room. I think we're all back from breakout rooms. We have a great suggestion from Allison Lane in the chat. She says, always give your socials up front on the slide and in the chat so that people can act during your presentation, because there is a steep drop off around 48 minutes in, and they will miss your socials if you save them at the end. I always put my contact information on the first slide as well as on the last slide. And I usually also work in like a little extra slide that has like a, thanks for taking the webinar kind of message for people as well. Charla, welcome back. We are going to dive into our top 3 takeaways from today in just a moment. Before we do, I want to let you all know, feel free to forward the replay email to a writer friend. We always welcome more people of all genders on the Writer Bridge. Next week, 2 weeks from now, November 29th, join us for Do-Overs with Allison Lane. And you're going to get invited to send in either your social links or your Word documents for feedback about how to transform your posts, pitches, queries, pages from flop to fabulous. There are 3 things that you can do today to increase your ability to teach webinars or enjoy webinars. Charla, will you start us off?
Yeah, I would say we've covered this already, but I would say finding organizations and or authors you want to work with and seeing what they offer is probably the place to start. And then knowing what you can offer, knowing your topic. And that includes, we already covered this, but what problem or fear does your presentation set out to solve? Why is it a problem of fear? And who is your ideal audience who would benefit from hearing about it? And then reaching out to them and letting them know, like, I have this idea. How do I proceed? That would be my top 3.
And as a great way to start thinking about what you want to teach, look at the organization you want to teach for and look at what they're teaching now and think about what you have a reaction or a response to. Like, oh, if I was going to teach this topic, this is what I'd make sure to cover. Or if I was going to teach this topic, I would totally approach it from a different angle that this person is approaching it from. And then write your thoughts out, the short version of your thoughts, either as a blog post or as a social media thread, because it gives you a chance to formulate, here's what I think about how I would teach it. And it starts publicly establishing you as an expert in that topic.
I was thinking also, I know we've talked about pitching and that's like starting it, but I would say also, as soon as you get that webinar pitch, return it as soon as possible, because CNF, we're not scheduling till like August 2023. We've got our whole year pretty much filled out, but some organizations, as soon as they get it, then they can start marketing it, and then you can get on their schedule. If you wait too long, you might miss that window, that opportunity. So that's just something to keep in mind as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Whether your forte is webinars, whether you are really just going to be a newsletter person, whether you want to do a series of social posts, whether you want to talk at a book club, there is value in getting your teaching out there. What you have to say is important, and putting what you have to say into a format for a class helps you further flesh out what you think about what you're teaching. I have made so many discoveries for my own learning about my own editing process, about my own writing process, because I had to put it into words to teach it to someone else. If you're not ready for webinars, make it a social post, make it a blog, make it a newsletter. But the more you publicly say, I have stuff to say about this topic, the more people are going to trust your opinions and pay you to express them, which is always great for all of us. Thank you all so much for being here at the Writers Bridge. Fantastic to have you. Thank you, Charla, for being here today. Please feel free to unmute yourselves for a joyful goodbye. And thank you, Charla Yates from Creative Nonfiction. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Charla.
Thank you very much.
Sweet to say. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.